Okay, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mina Nutbeam, Program Manager for the CORES program at SAFE, also known as Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. If you're less familiar with us, CORES is a certification that recognizes owner-operators and third-party providers that have developed a robust commitment, capacity, and competency in providing resident services coordination in affordable rental homes. In today's webinar, we're going to be exploring proven and developing pathways to pay for resident services, as well as strategies to ensure that your funded programs align with the priorities of residents, community needs, and your organization's mission. Next slide, please. Before we get started, here are just some logistical items to cover today. Again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and share resources there. Today's recording and slides will be made available to everyone who's registered and shared in our resource library. Any resources that we mention will also be shared after the webinar. And if you do have questions, you can go ahead and use our Q&A function. Next slide, please. So now more than ever, organizations are facing increasing constraints to funding programs and services for their residents. While identifying funding for resident services has always been a challenge, we know that current financial pressures are continuing to mount at a time when resident services have never been more critical to supporting resident housing stability and health and well-being. So CORES recognizes the importance of developing a funding model to help sustain your services, which often includes a diverse array of funding sources to help ensure residents continue to have access to robust and relevant resources. These funding sources may include government and foundation grants, individual donations, property operations, and more. Increasingly, we're seeing a movement to recognize services as core to property operations and your resident stability. In today's webinar, we won't be exploring all the possible pathways to fund your services, but we are going to focus on proven and developing pathways to pay for resident services leveraged by 3 CORES certified organizations. These organizations are forming health partnerships to pay for services, developing strong fundraising strategies and relationships with donors, and identifying avenues that for-profit providers can leverage to supplement services. And with that, I'm excited to introduce today's presenters. Joining us, we have Nii Soa, who currently serves as the VP of Community Impact at Enterprise Community Development, their dedicated resident services and engagement team. There, he oversees all development and strategic alignment of the portfolio's resident engagement programming within the Community Development Division at Enterprise Community Partners. Prior to his current role, he served as the Director of Family Sports Center and Co-Director of Operations at Bon Secours Community Works, where he supported initiatives focused on early childhood education, family preservation, youth and young adult services, resource development, career development, supportive services, and more. Nee received his Bachelor's of Science in Business Management from Morgan State University and completed his Master's in Public Admin at the University of Baltimore with a concentration in public and nonprofit administration. Stacy Burchett is VP of External Affairs at the Better Housing Coalition, or BHC, overseeing BHC's fundraising, communications, marketing, and public policy advocacy efforts. Prior to joining BHC in 2013, she was Director of Fund Development and Communications for the Virginia Health Care Foundation, a philanthropic organization dedicated to increasing access to health care for Virginia's uninsured. She also served as Associate Director of Development for Spark, the School of the Performing Arts in the Richmond community. Ms. Burchett serves on the Resource Development Advisory Committee for NeighborWorks America and is a member of the Richmond chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. She holds a BA in Liberal Arts from Vermont College of Union Institute and University and has certificates in fundraising and development and marketing for nonprofits from the University of Richmond, Virginia's Institute on Philanthropy. Last but not least, Jennifer Owens has served as the VP of Resident Services at Columbia Residential for the past 12 years, and in her current role, she manages the delivery of resident services and resources to low to moderate income families and seniors, aiming to maintain housing stability. She also oversees resident relocation projects focused on preserving affordable housing, and she earned a master's in social work at Georgia State University and is recognized as one of Urban Land Institute Atlanta's Women's Leadership Initiatives leaders in 2021. So with that, I'm excited to kick it off to Nee to start today's presentations. Welcome.
Well, great afternoon, everyone. As Mina shared, my name is Niso. I'm with Enterprise Community Development. And before sort of jumping into some of the details of what we're here to talk about, just wanted to provide a quick snapshot of Enterprise Community Development. Don't want to take for granted that everyone has heard of us or is familiar with how we are set up. So if we can go to the next slide, just want to give you a quick snapshot of who is Enterprise Community Development. We serve the Mid-Atlantic. Our northern borders are York, Pennsylvania, all the way down to the Richmond, Virginia area. A few years ago, just three and a half, about 4 years ago, three organizations merged into one. And this all happened in January of 2020. So we know a couple of months after that, the world changed on us. But just to give you a little bit of perspective of how we are set up, and it will bring into context some of what I'm going to share in a few minutes. Across our portfolio, we own and operate just over 115 apartment home communities, and over 50% of our portfolio is made up of senior communities, designated as seniors communities. However, within our family communities, we also have those individuals and residents who are age 55 and older. So pretty significant demographic across our portfolio. About 13,000 units and serving over 22,000 residents. And with particular focus with our resident services team, we have 25 full-time team members and 4 part-time contractual team members. So again, just wanted to give you a really high-level snapshot of how we are set up and really to talk about funding now. So if you can go to the next slide, one of the areas that we share when talking about our financing is this is the model that we seek. So I'll share with you what we seek and then also where we are now. So we look at three predominant areas that fund our resident services. We reinvest a significant amount of property operation dollars for those communities that have the ability to afford them back into our resident services team. The mix that we're looking for is a third, a third, a third. So we call it our three-legged stool. Then we also lean towards about a third of our funding coming from fundraising. So these are individuals, institutions, corporations, and then a third of our funding coming from our corporate reinvestment. And so Enterprise Community Partners is a national nonprofit, and our communities company or the communities division focuses just in the Mid-Atlantic. So we do receive a significant amount of support to keep our resident services operations running. So as you can see here with our three-legged stool, it's pretty even and it seems ideal. That is not necessarily where we are right now. The last few years have been challenging, I know for many of us, if not all of us, that are on the call today, as well as others. And so the makeup of our funding sources, about 68, 70% of it comes from corporate reinvestment, which is a very significant amount and also brings into question a number of different things. Primarily, how do we continue to serve residents at a high level? And then also, how do we sustain this level of work to ensure that we are making the impact that we say that we are interested in making? If you can go to the next slide. So as we are talking about the various funding sources and the communities that have the ability to pay, and then also how do we sustain this work, our work specifically with resident services falls into what we call 4 impact areas. Now, one thing just to note, and something I've been really sharing with our team and really socializing throughout the organization is that when we talk about resident services is not a person, right? It's not a person. Although our department is resident services, is not just a department. It is a philosophy and a commitment that the organization has made and continues to make as the needs of residents evolved. And so, as it relates to our impact areas, they fall in one of these 4 areas and really overlap often because we know that the needs of individuals typically are not just in one area. So those 4 areas are community building and engagement, economic security and mobility, education, as well as health and wellness. And as I just referenced across the work that we do, we find that there is support that is needed in one or more of those areas all at the same time. So when we are looking for partnerships, whether they are community-based or whether or not they are regional, we look for partners that have the capacity to support our work in these various areas. And when we do look to identify partners, there are a couple of key high-level things that we look for. One is, does the partner have the funding? Maybe they have the funding and they're looking for additional people to be able to connect to that funding. And in some cases, and for our situation, we look at what funding do we have? How can we leverage our internal funding? We know that we have residents that have the need because we've taken the time to ask the question and we continue to ask. And then also, how can we then bring in that level of expertise? And so that leads us down a number of different paths on a regular basis of not only being introduced to certain partners, but then also going out and seeking partners to see whether or not the relationship is a meaningful one, making sure that the vision and the mission align with each other. And then ultimately, as these discussions are taking place, is the resident going to benefit? And when I say benefit, that means different things, but overall, is the need of the resident that's been lifted up to us, is it being met? And then also, what does that mean short term as well as long term? Next slide, please. And so that leads us into one of our partnerships that been asked to really speak about that has really been evolving a little bit over this year, now about 14, 15 months now, with a partner called Ounce of Care. We were introduced to them by actually one of our senior leaders within Enterprise for some work that they're doing nationally. As I mentioned before, Enterprise Community Partners has a national reach, and so there's different conversations that are taking place and exposure that is taking place that allows us to get connected to some of like the regional partners. But we started our partnership back in Q4 of 2023. And it was an interesting time organizationally because there were some leadership changes, new CEO, just a different approach to how we were doing our work. And at that time, the primary need was for Washington, D.C. Our relationship with Ounce of Care has actually expanded since then. So not only do they provide support to some of our communities in Washington, D.C., is that the portfolio has also expanded to Richmond, Virginia. Across both of those regions, there are communities that they support that are multifamily, as well as communities that are senior. So in many areas, as we all know, some of those needs are pretty similar. In a lot of situations, those needs are almost at the other end of the spectrum. So it was important to find a partner that understood that dynamic and had the capacity as well as the flexibility to navigate in those different spaces. Kind of just even going back to the name of the organization, Ounce of Care, their primary focus was on healthcare. And at that time, it was predominantly focused in the DC market. And so as we began to build the partnership and really the relationship, we were able to have deeper conversations, more meaningful conversations of in addition to healthcare and the way that we support through some of our existing funding, bringing in partnerships, how can we also work with this particular partner, Alsa Care, to leverage some of the funding resources that they bring in? They do have the ability to, and has really shown up well and has benefited us, the ability to get reimbursed for some of their activities that they perform and working with our residents. So that is great on a number of different fronts. One, from a sustainability standpoint, not only for the partnership, but then also for their organization. But then it also lends itself to, well, what could this turn into? What could it be over the long haul? And allows for the partnership to really think outside of the box, again, based on what the needs of the residents that continue to show up, as well as organizationally, is it also meeting the organization's needs? And with this partnership, what I am really excited about is that it is a true partnership. It's grown into a true partnership, and it's at all levels. It's not only myself and working with the senior leadership team of their organization, but also there are senior managers that are on our team. We have resident service managers, we have property managers that all engage with members of the Ounce of Care team on an ongoing basis. I think that's super advantageous because there is not a bottleneck when it comes to information sharing. And then also it puts us in a strategically, it puts us in a space where when different issues come up, we can address them sooner rather than later. So again, it allows for the relationship to be an authentic one, but also one that meets the needs of residents on a daily basis. Within these different communities, one of the areas, if we can go to the next slide, one of the areas and many of the areas that we provide services may be similar to the work that you all are doing as well. As I mentioned before, primary area for this organization was healthcare assistance, but it's also sort of blossomed out to utility assistance, food security, which is a significant service that we provide across our portfolio, about 60 At this point, about 68, 69% of our communities have some kind of food security or distribution type of program that is happening. And it lends itself to career and job readiness, rental assistance, public screening, benefit screening across our portfolio. And then also, one of the things that we did not abandon through coming out of COVID was around computer and digital literacy. It is extremely important, one, just to utilize technology in a different way. And one of the components of the services that Ounce Care provides is that when they are not physically on site, there is also an opportunity to gain access to them via text, via phone call, as well as via Zoom. So there's a virtual component that, again, allows that flexibility for residents to be able to connect with them, as well as staff to be able to connect with their staff in a timely manner. Again, that just helps with the overall relationship. It helps us to think outside of the box. And sort of in closing, one of the important areas is what are we doing now, but then also where are we going? So, from a strategic standpoint and understanding that there's a lot that's going on across the entire country. So, from a financial standpoint, there are some pinch points that our organization is facing, I'm sure, just like many. But what we're looking at now is with our existing funding, how can we do a better job at leveraging it? Short term as well as long term, and then what does that actually mean? And the work that we do, the data that we capture, the narrative that comes from that data. When I say the narrative, the actual impact that is being made in the way that we service residents as well as the surrounding communities in some cases as well. And we're taking that information and we're actually in the process right now of developing a 3-year strategic plan that includes not only the programmatic work that we're doing, but also the operational side of what we're doing, the fundraising side of it. All of these different components make up who we are, but then also more so where are we going? And so that's just a quick snapshot of where this work is evolving to from a strategic standpoint so that we can connect it into the day-to-day operations. And with that, going to the next slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nee.
Back to you, Mina.
That's all really helpful information, especially around how you're thinking about this strategically and expanding. Just a quick clarification. So when you said they were able to get reimbursed for some of those activities, I wanted to clarify that that's Medicaid reimbursement,
Yes,
correct? And that
that is
they're
absolutely correct. Yes,
okay, and
that is
they're
correct.
using that reimbursement, and that in turn sort of reduces the cost of services for you all, that they're able to reimburse some of those services. Is that right?
It does. That is absolutely
Okay.
correct. And with that ability for them to be reimbursed, and thank you for asking for that clarifying question, it allows us to think about the work differently because now we're leveraging several different existing funding sources as well as looking for new funding sources to do the work. But yes, you're absolutely correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I will turn it over to Stacy. I think you're on mute, Stacy.
I do that all the time. Sorry. My name's Stacy. As Mina said, I'm with the Better Housing Coalition, and we can just go right into the first slide. We have been around since 1988, and our current total annual budget is about 26 million. In contrast with Enterprise, as Neve was mentioning, at the size of his organization. We currently own and operate 20 rental properties. Almost half 9 are for our senior residents, very similar to Nee's operation. We have 1,800, a little over 1,800 rental units, almost 2,600 residents right now. And we also have a single family uh, effort where we build and sell single family homes. Our three main divisions are real estate development and property management, which are two of the economic generators for our organization. And then we have resident services as a third very important pillar of our mission, and which is to change lives and transform communities through high quality, affordable housing. We have about 80 staff members, and about 2/3 of those are located on the property sites, including most of our resident support teammates, which are number in 9. And then my department is 4 staff members. Next slide. Just a little bit about our programs, very similar to Enterprise for adults and families, mainly focus on economic mobility, housing, stability, All of our services are voluntary and offered free of charge to our residents, and they're supported 100% from fundraising activities. Um, our we usually provide our services either directly to our residents by our staff members, or we coordinate services with community partners and bring some people in who help provide some of those services. We do some workforce development, budgeting help, financial counseling, job acquisition skills, monitoring the skills that they have, assessing the needs and desires of what type of job they might like to have, and work towards getting them a higher wage paying job, and better financial stability. We also offer a higher education scholarship program for our residents who are seeking a degree, a professional certificate, or anything that will allow them to get a better job. Next slide. We have about over 1,000 seniors. Not all of them live in a senior community with us. They are, most of them do take advantage of our services. We help them age in place with dignity and with better health. A lot of our residents, senior residents, stay with us until they either pass away um, or need a greater level of care than we are able to provide. And so that's why our health and wellness and socialization activities, as you all know, are so important in helping them age in place longer and more healthy. And food access is a big deal for them as well as for our other families. And so we do provide, in conjunction with a number of community partners, access to free or reduced cost healthy foods and nutritions, and things like that. And also healthcare access, physical, mental, and dental health care. As you can see, we're going to talk a little bit about our fundraising slice here. As you can see from the pie chart on the left, our division in external affairs, my team raised last year more than $1.7 million to help underwrite resident services and operating expenses. Our department is primarily charged with raising funds just for general operating expenses and resident services programs. But with that, we also raise capital from time to time to help fill gaps in construction projects and funds for other special projects as well. So for example, last year, our team contributed to raising an additional $7 million in funding to help underwrite our real estate development needs. The majority of the pie on the left, the buckets that the funding comes from writing a lot of grants to foundation funders, the majority, 42%, as you can see. And of the total funds raised last year, about 700,000 was raised for resident services programs, represented on the pie chart on the right. So that represents about 2/3 of that department's annual $1 million or so budget. And funding gaps are primarily filled with operating funds. And so whatever we can help raise to fill those gaps, we know is going to go to a good place and be well utilized. So again, foundations, very similar to our overall fundraising, foundations make up the major source of funding for resident services, followed by corporations, and then public funds, which in our case is mostly local government funding here. On the left, you'll see that we do have a nice slice of the pie provided by individuals for overall funding, which we really don't have towards resident services right now. But again, a lot of those annual funds that we raise end up in the resident services pot as well as needed. One thing that we are grateful about right now is that we're not substantially reliant on federal funding for our general fundraising activities. Next slide. So just to talk a little bit about our fundraising strategies, which have evolved over time, our goals are to try to attract the most flexible fundraising or funding sources to be used, I guess, in the best way that best place to put them, or best way that you need to use them. Rather than just for any program, if we're able to do that, try to diversify our sources. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, the diversity in your funding sources is so important. And then looking for future sustainability as well. So all of these tactics here, many of you will be very familiar with: individual giving, annual fund appeals, major giving, corporations and foundations grant applications and event sponsorship, and then all your special events. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how our fundraising strategies evolved. So, has this happened to you before? Your fundraising staff writes a grant for an existing program that you have. Somewhere between submitting the grant application and shortly after being awarded the grant, something happens internally, like a staffing shortage, possibly a leadership change, or a shifting of priorities internally that affects your ability to use the grant funds as intended or report on the outcome stated in the application. So, or has this happened? You've been getting generous funding for the same corporate partner for the past 5 years. The deadline's approaching to submit an application. You log onto the website only to notice they have new funding priorities and your programs don't fit into any of those. So that's definitely happened to us, all of that. And so we are always thinking about how do we overcome, these problems. One of those is to think about how you format your applications to cover the greatest need possible. So difficulties raising operating funds in general, coupled with shifting priorities, led us to brainstorm some options. So we really hadn't been considering housing, overall housing as the big umbrella as a program, but it is. And so instead of talking about just resident services programs or general operating needs, which, is not too exciting to funders, um, general operating isn't, then we call it gaining and maintaining housing stability. And so that might, and in those applications, we talk about all the stuff that we do, real estate development, our property management, our resident services. And so when we are awarded funds from a funder for our gaining and maintaining housing stability program, we put that towards general operating. And so we can use those funds more flexibly. Of course, we do have certain programs that there are certain funders that definitely are interested in doing that. And so we continue to write about 40 to 50 grants a year to help underwrite those resident services programs. Another thing that happened that affected our fundraising strategy over time was during the COVID years. Of course, we all were affected by that. Our residents were hurting as jobs are being lost, or wages and hours being reduced, which in turn threatened our organization stability, of course, if rents could not be paid. At the same time, we had a few projects nearing construction start at the same time, and their progress was threatened by the skyrocketing labor and materials costs. So we pivoted from our normal fundraising activities and secured a $3 million lead gift from a corporate partner, which we were able to leverage that grant into a total of $8 million from some other foundations, primarily foundations, a couple of corporations in there. And we asked for the funds to be allocated 60% to real estate development to help keeping those new developments moving forward during these difficult years, but 30% to resident services programs and 10% for general operating. And you can do the math and know that those percentages seem a little small for resident services and general operating, but for grants of that size, they're pretty substantial. And that kept our projects and our residents afloat during a very difficult time. So that's something that we are really trying to utilize, is that 60-30-10 mix on some of our grants, so that we always have funding for resident services as we build new developments and bring more residents in who are in need of the services. So thinking about, fundraising is writing grants, a lot of it, and that's tedious process. And some of the funders, as we mentioned before, change priorities and you're not sure, where you're going to fill that gap now. So we started to turn towards how can we take the pressure off some of the fundraising and make sure we're providing for our resident services programs. So in 2019, we seeded a small endowment for resident services programs, which is slowly growing. And we're waiting until the balance reaches at least $1 million before we will draw any of the funds down. So we're almost there. It's reached about 700,000 right now. To help grow that balance, we have two strategies. One, is to solicit major gifts directly for the endowment. And number two, meeting with donors to talk about legacy giving, or, leaving us, mentioning Better Housing Coalition in their will as an example. And so our board agreed that proceeds from all legacy gifts, once they're realized or as people pass away, will be deposited to the endowment to help that grow and sustain that even past that $1 million mark. So we know that we're not going to see a lot of the benefits of that for a few years at least, but we've laid the groundwork to make that happen. Just that picture right there is a unique partnership that our Director of Development developed, and that's with a local it's Commercial Real Estate Women in Richmond. It's a local women's construction industry group, membership group. They have an annual charity bash, and they have designated the proceeds of their annual charity bash to Better Housing Coalition. So, I mean, that's a fabulous partnership with them. We have very little to do except show up and be supportive, and then they write us a big check at the end of the day. So that's nice, and something to consider. And then finally, the Catalyst Fund is a brand new concept where we're trying to raise equity from some ultra high net worth individuals. And so we're really in the nascent stages of that right now. But the goal, which is very ambitious, is to raise $100 million for future projects. But we're looking to allocate some of the funds raised from that to resident services. And then a final slide. So collaborating. So as fundraisers, we really need to understand the work our organization is doing and the processes and the challenges to success if we're going to be effective in raising funds to support it, right? So the best way to do that is to build relationships with program staff and attend, team and also committee meetings. So our staff attends our program committee meetings, our real estate development committee meetings, etc. For grant applications, we always meet with the program staff to make sure that we and they can carry out the activities that we say we're going to apply for, and to get their input on listing the goals and outcomes that can reasonably be achieved. And if a new opportunity comes up, we ask program staff if they're already doing something that would fit in with that funder's priorities. We discourage creating programs to fit into a funder's priorities because we've learned the hard way to not do that. And you might have some of your own horror stories with that. Everyone in your universe is a fundraiser, whether they think they are or not, starting at the top of the organization. So if your CEO or executive director is committed to helping raise funds and already has or can develop contacts to help you do that, life in fundraising is much easier. Likewise, your board members can open doors to building relationships with foundation and corporations through their network of contacts, and they can bring friends to events and spread the word about the work you're doing to their colleagues to help increase individual giving. Some of the other resources that we use since our external affairs team is so small, we contract with an experienced grant writer, and she helps us submit those grants each year. We also have a very passionate young professionals board, some of whom you see here in this photograph. They're very passionate about our mission, and they help us raise funds and spread the word about our work every year. They host our annual Gingerbread House Challenge fundraising event, as well as a spring bike tour of some of our properties that are concentrated in one area of Richmond to help spread awareness. And they often step up to help with one-off fundraisers as well. With that, I hope that's been helpful to some of you. And if you have any questions, then I'm happy to answer them. Other than that, I'm back to you, Mina.
Thanks, Stacy. And I'm going to pass it right along to Jennifer.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. So looking at Columbia Residential, so we are a private housing developer, mixed income housing developer focused on family and seniors. So we are based out of Atlanta, Georgia. We also do have properties though in Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. And for Columbia Residential, we have about three different, at the bottom of this slide that you're looking at, three different organizations. So I'm going to do a little bit about each because for me, we're really focusing on Core Connect, which is the last one. But for Columbia Residential, the parent company, our mission is to provide quality, affordable housing, and we have an in-house resident services team whose mission is to ensure resident housing stability and build healthy communities. Overall, we have about 9,000 units of housing, and our in-house resident service team does most of the programming within our Georgia properties. We do contract out with other organizations. Shout out to Apartment Life. I see a few of you guys on this. And they're our partner in Florida, and then we partner with other organizations in Texas and in Louisiana. So in 2017, we decided to expand our services outside of our regular resident services in-house team and looked at providing relocation services. We started acquiring and rehabbing some of our older properties, and we were not able to find an organization that could actually provide the high level of resident services during the time of a relocation project, whether that be offsite to another location or on-site at our properties. So we decided to create our own and expanded our staff underneath our resident services department to include a company that later became to be known as Dash and Dwell, which is that second logo on the slide. And then later in 2022, we expanded into the nonprofit world and decided to create a nonprofit affiliate called Core Connect to figure out how to raise funding for some of the things we wanted to do in resident services without actually moving our resident services team outside of our company. So for Columbia Residential, we wanted to be considered all-inclusive, where we still have an in-house resident services team where we are providing a direct resident services model to our residents by doing individual support to them and also doing programming focused on many of the same areas that the last two presentations were on. So youth development and leadership, workforce stability, independent living longevity for our seniors, general health and wellness overall. And so for that, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the different funding sources we use and then jump into why we decided to include a nonprofit sort of into our mix. So for the next slide, we can go to look at our funding strategy. So in the green, we have resident services. We have 3 full-time regional resident service managers who are part of the Columbia Residential Resident Service team. They are funded through a per dollar door resident services fee as part of the actual property itself, just like any owner or developer would have a developer fee or a management fee. We have a dollar per door resident services fee. It takes about 10 properties in order to be able to fund one full-time regional resident service manager. So that person has a portfolio of about 10 properties where they do all of the programming, and they also work with community partners to also identify some additional funding for those programs. Next, underneath Dash and Dwell, we have 3 full-time relocation project managers. They are funded by a direct services fee per occupied unit at any relocation project. So we are able to actually bill directly for our relocation services through the relocation budgets, and that actually funds all of the staffing when we're doing relocation, including those full-time positions. And then lastly, we have 7 full-time resident service coordinators at individual properties. So they don't have a portfolio. They work full-time at one property, and that is through the operational budgets of the properties that they serve. So that is a ownership and partnership commitment to resident services at that property, where the actual operations of the properties pays full-time for those resident service coordinators. And the program budgets, so office supplies, money in order to actually host programs or develop programs are also billed towards the property operations budgets for throughout our entire portfolio. So we'll go to the next slide. When we were looking at incorporating a nonprofit, I think what many organizations do is look at how do they sort of move their entire resident services department into a nonprofit organization in order to help with funding, in order to find funding services, and in order to get grants and have people donate and be able to get a tax deduction for that. For us, again, it was really important that we kept resident services within the actual private housing development of our company. So we are actually underneath the property management department for Columbia Residential. And we asked ourselves, it's been about 12 years that I've been doing this with Columbia. So we've sort of started to ask ourselves, what are the things that are coming up that we cannot do as being part of the actual owner management entity? As many of you know, there are a lot of fair housing rules and regulations when you're looking at doing programming or you're looking at providing any type of extra financial assistance to residents. You're very limited when you're actually underneath the ownership or development arm of a company. And so for us, there were certain things that stood out that we wanted to be able to provide as an expansion of our services, not as just taking our entire resident services department and making us a nonprofit and having Columbia basically have a third party resident services arm. So the programs that we ended up focusing on within the nonprofit is the first one, which is directly in the middle in gray, is called CORE. So we are looking at trying to be one of the receivers of money for programs like rental assistance, utility assistance, food assistance, being able to have financial assistance for our residents that we can directly connect our residents to in order to meet all of their basic needs. Then we looked at education to the core. So the founder of Columbia Residential was very big on residents being able to have the opportunity, especially our youth, in continued education, going on to whether it be a post-secondary degree or getting a vocational degree, anything that we could help them financially in order to support that dream of theirs. And in order to do educational scholarships as the actual ownership entity, we didn't want to give that, or we didn't have a mechanism of doing that directly to our residents and raising funds for that. So that's how we focused on education to the core as one of our second programs for the nonprofit. And then our third focus is what we're calling housing to the core. So something that we are passionate about at Columbia is having a certain amount of set aside units at some of our properties for permanent supportive housing in order to support residents who have special needs, whether that's coming out of homelessness, substance abuse issues, domestic violence, HIV, AIDS. And one thing we know as a developer is while you can provide the housing for residents, it is just a foundation. It is just a geography change without the wraparound services for residents. It doesn't help as much as it should long-term. So therefore, in order for us to be able to provide more wraparound services, more supportive services for residents who may be staying in our permanent supportive housing units and actually being able to expand the number of set-aside units we have at our properties, our third focus was housing to the core. Our resident services team, we are not case managers. While I have my master's in social work, our team does not focus and they're not experts on populations with special needs. So we want to be able, we can't provide those services directly to our residents. We prefer to actually work with organizations who do have the specialty and the expertise in that area to serve those residents more specifically. So our housing to the core focus is around raising money in order to provide more and increase more of those supportive wraparound services for residents in those units. Overall, with Core Connect, we again started in 2022. Last year, we hired our first executive director. So this is very fresh. We have not even launched this internally or externally. And when I say internally, I mean to the family of Columbia Residential, actually getting ready to do our launch next month. So we're very excited about that. And our focus is really on foundation and corporate dollars and private dollars. We are not at this point in time really searching out government dollars for all the reasons that many know. It can get very complicated, and there's been a lot of change with the current administration. And so we're really trying to stay in the private world, foundational corporate world for right now. And so all together, these three arms of our in-house resident services team with Columbia Residential, our expansion into relocation services with Dash and Dwell, and now into Core Connect, being able to provide direct financial assistance to our residents in these three major areas, that sort of makes up our world of resident services and how we look at funding programs. So we can go to the final slide. I just want to say thank you for having me, and those are our websites if you want to check us out in order to see. Even though we haven't launched Core Connect yet, our website is currently up and running. And when I say launch, I just mean basically like our donations page. So we're going to be launching our sponsorship and doing some hosting events and fundraising events coming up within the next few months. So thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Jennifer. We do have some quick questions, I think, for you, just clarification. So, can you just remind folks the scale of your portfolio? And then someone else asked about the dollar amount per door that you had talked about. If you could, if you're comfortable speaking a bit more to that and what that looks like.
Yeah. So the scale of our portfolio, so we have about 63 properties total. I believe that it's growing every day. And so about, I would say 45 to 50 of those are family properties, and the rest are senior housing properties. Again, majority based in the Atlanta, Metro Atlanta region in Georgia. And then we do have a few properties in Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. So 9,000 units total. And then the dollar per door fee it's very minimal. It's about $5 per door per month at all of our properties, and that is billed as a resident services fee, like administration fee. When you take that together, take about 10 of those properties together with that monthly dollar per door fee, we're actually able to hire a full-time, we call them, their title is regional resident service manager, though they do not have any staff underneath them. They are regional resident service managers because they have a portfolio of 10 to 12 properties each, where they do very high level resident services. So mostly the individual support that they provide to their residents is a lot of one-on-one referral information services where the residents can contact them at any time. They do host office hours at their properties about once or twice a month, but because they have so many properties, they have to split that up. And then their programming. So their programming, they're doing about, I would say maybe 4 to 6 events or programs at their property every single month. And so then there's the other 7 full-time resident service coordinators that are specifically at a individual property and funded through the property's operational budgets.
Gotcha. And just a quick follow-up, someone asked, so for those staff that may be assigned to multiple properties, is it typically just family or just senior, or do they sort of have a mix underneath?
They do not have a mix. So we
Okay.
have 2 who have all family properties and 1 who has all senior properties. And the reason for that is, again, when you sort of look at that model, having that many properties for one person, though the funding for their salary comes from this dollar per door, a lot of the funding for the actual programs themselves is coming through partnerships, right? So we
Yeah.
are seeing ourselves as the people in the place, and then we'll partner with organizations like we have a partnership with Matter Health that provides on-site preventive primary care for residents at our senior properties. And it's more so of them managing the relationships and partnerships that we have in order to do our programming at those properties.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, quick question going back to Nee's presentation, although I think this could apply to other folks too. Someone was asking about if you could further define or speak to when you were talking about corporate reinvestment and what this looks like. And you talked about corporate reinvestment, and also I think a few folks talked about, corporate funding sources and what that means.
Absolutely. So the way that Enterprise is made up, Enterprise Community Partners is our parent organization. We try to keep away from using that language with our parent organization. Then there are three companies underneath of ECP for short, and we are the communities division. There's also the investment side, and there's also the solutions, the technical assistance side. So there's funding that comes from property operations, give or take about 40% of our communities actually have an ability to pay for some. So to a certain degree, that is still coming from the corporation at the overall company. But when I am referencing corporate, it is from our parent organization. So this is funding that comes out, is separate and apart from the communities division that enterprise as a whole, because it's mission based, has made that commitment. There are a number of different factors in there, specifically around sustainability. So over the course of last year, we have a new president that's on board and working with our relatively new CEO. We, as a senior leadership team, went through a strategic planning process and developed not only, well, we developed a theory of change, but then also a 5-year sustainability plan. So that funding that we receive from the parent organization is, we know that it's not, sustainable into perpetuity. What can we do to sort of make up that fill between fundraising and some of the other areas? But ultimately, the corporate funding that I'm referring to comes from our parent organization. Oh, and just to give a little bit of context too, Mina, is that our overall resident services budget, give or take, is about $7 million a year. So that just lets you know, sort of dollars and cents, a significant amount of that does come from our corporate fill.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, something I want to ask the full group, just given the current dynamic and evolving policy environment, how are you all thinking about any shifts to fundraising strategies, or places you're paying attention to currently?
Sure. Well, I'll jump on and actually just had a call with our resource development team early this morning and a potential partner. We're looking at it on a couple of different fronts. One from a traditional standpoint of, well, what is our current financial situation? What funding sources we be losing? Stacy did reference sort of coming across a partner that their focus has changed. We did come across that with a long-term investor of our after-school program. I want to say 10, 12 years even before I came on board. They just shifted. But luckily, we were in a position where the communities that they were serving, that the property had enough funding to make up that difference. But really looking at that level of detail, but as it relates to our team and partnering with our property operations team, we're looking like 18, 24 months down the road as well, is what makes sense now, helping the organization to, I'm going to say redefine, but it's really define what does resident services mean, because it can't be everything to everyone. So it's important that we all are working from the same definition, because sometimes the expectations is greater than the resources. And so that is also helping us to just manage the internal expectations and tension that sometimes can be built there. And that's also helping our team to work closer with our development team, because going back to the corporate investment question, those are funds that can also support development deals, new development deals. So if it's being reinvested back into programming, which is us, how can we continue to show up as a value add, and it doesn't come across as an expense? So just looking at our work, especially from a funding and programmatic standpoint, much differently than in the previous 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned that Catalyst Fund, that's kind of one of the reasons behind why we're looking to do something. It's a very ambitious plan. Um, we don't know how it's going to work out or if we're going to recognize or realize that $100 million. It would be great if we did, but so it's nothing ventured, nothing gained, and that's kind of what we're trying to do to ameliorate some of the unknowns that are facing us. So we'll see.
We've really been looking at our programming, kind of like Neil was talking about. We have been thinking about how do we still bring value, or how do we relate resident services to the actual owner and developer of that is Columbia Residential, in order to, because we want to continue to remain part of the company. And like I said, not necessarily go into fundraising for our resident services staff. We've been trying to look at how other people view resident services and what our value is to maintaining the actual asset, like being a valuable group of individuals who are underneath property management, and being able to say, by having us here, we are actually able to continue to support your property management staff in these unique and individual ways where we can have very close relationships with our residents. And in asking ourselves those questions, it really has had us change and look more at the impact work. I think it's very similar to where the core certification went with the recertification process of, instead of just looking at our outputs, what are our actual outcomes and how are we measuring those, and how are we able to tell our story a little bit better, because we are not trying to increase our government funding for resident services. We are really trying to increase our funding on the corporate foundational investor side of the business. And in order to do that, we can't just speak resident services language. We have to be able to apply resident services, our value and what we're doing, to the language that financial investors use, that developers use, that investors use. And also being very, very intentional on what each of our sections, because we do have the separate internal resident services team, then the separate relocation services team, and now the nonprofit focus, making sure we're not blurring any of those lines, making sure that when we are approaching individuals and talking to individuals and sharing our story of resident services and what we do and how we can be beneficial to them, understanding and helping them understand where that focus is and where that lines up, so that they are actually interested in wanting to continue to support us the way that we want to be supported. We're trying very hard to not chase the dollars that I think sometimes we can get into, especially within the nonprofit part of our work, and really staying intentional with what we do and how we frame that story.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a great ending point, and you all spoke to that, I think, in your thoughtful ways about looking towards funding and aligning to your priorities and impact through resident services. So with that, thank you all again so much for joining us. We just want to share some additional resources here. We will be posting this to the CORE's resource library. If you want to learn about future webinars, subscribe to our newsletter. And we will be hosting an upcoming webinar, date TBD, but register for our newsletter to learn more about that, on leveraging cores with impact investors. And we have a resource we've developed that talks about cores and alignment with some of those impact investing tools that are being used in the impact investing space, focused on real estate and housing. So make sure to check that out. And again, we will share the recording and slides after today's webinar. And thank you all again for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.